first and foremost, I'm not an attorney. I don't practice law, and I don't know all the answers to all these things that I'm going to talk about today. So this is on the cutting edge of what's going on in legislation today. And so I'm going to keep it at a pretty high level. I borrowed a presentation from a professor of law down in Texas Tech University. He's pretty well known across the nation as one of the people leading digital estate planning issues. His name is Jerry Bayer, I believe is how he pronounces his last name. But I got this presentation from another Commonwealth financial advisor who I know up in the Boston area, and she said, you know, this is as good as we've got right now when it comes to this type of information. So what we're going to do is we're going to go through a high level of what are digital estates. We're going to talk a little bit about that. We're going to talk about the need for planning. We're going to talk about the obstacles to planning. We're going to talk about some of the legal issues that are going on right now. And so before I get started, with just a show of hands, how many people in here have a Facebook account? All right. How many people have a Gmail email address? Pretty interesting statistics. So let me think. How many people store their digital photos or store photos on a computer somehow, some way? Yep. Pretty much common practice today. So what we're going to look at, again, I mentioned what are digital assets, what are digital estates, the importance of planning, how user policies impact the planning process. We'll talk a little bit about that. How federal law impacts it, methods to plan for it, obstacles to planning, I mentioned, and actually some fiduciary access rules that are out there, and then thoughts for the future. Definition. This is, interestingly enough, proposed statute, right? So there are still some rules that are out there, and they're debating what the true definition is. Is it going to be federal, or is it going to be state-driven? And again, when it comes to law, you have to have the language perfect. Texts, images, multimedia information, or personal property stored in a digital format, whether stored on a server, a computer, or other electronic device, which currently exists or may exist as technology develops, and regardless of the ownership of the physical device upon which the digital asset is stored. We've got an attorney over there laughing already. Digital assets include, without limitation, any words, characters, codes, or contractual rights necessary to access those digital estates. Now, this is Oregon's statute. And we'll see, but that's a pretty good overview of what someone may decide to include in what a digital asset is. More realistic to us, documents. Anything you have stored, your Word document, your Excel spreadsheet, your photos. How about your music? What about your videos? Tax records and returns, and now all the CPAs have gone electronic. So all those are now digital assets. PowerPoint presentations like this one. Email and text messages. How many people use a Kindle or the iPad to buy books, right? So these are all your ebooks as well too. So just some things to consider when you think, what is this digital asset stuff we talk about? Where are they? Well, on the computer is an obvious one. They're also stored many times, if you think about it, they're stored on a server elsewhere. Now the big push is the cloud, whether it's your cloud or someone else's cloud, which basically means a server somewhere else. That's where things are stored. Tablets, e-readers, cameras, memory cards or external devices, your flash drives, like I brought the presentation on, CDs, DVDs, and then obviously I mentioned in the cloud as well too, which are basically third-party computers. How do you get access to them? Well, most of them have a password. So you have to have a password to get onto the computer. You have to have a password to open up Windows. You have to have a password to get onto the file server that you have. Sometimes you have to have specific passwords to open a specific document. So even within our office, We have documents that not every employee can see. You know, I have my private stuff in my office. Password to access website where material is stored. So if it's on a third-party location, so to log into your Gmail account, you have to type in a password. Those emails aren't stored on your computer. They're stored on Google's computers. So some things to think about. We already mentioned Facebook. Of course, LinkedIn is the one that's more popular in the business world, and they're starting to gray the lines between Facebook and LinkedIn as they start to compete against each other. Instagram. Does anybody have an Instagram account? There you go. 2 folks. All right. Staff? Staff? No. All right. So I think we're a generation off from those two. So actually, Rob and I are a generation apart too. Twitter, MySpace, and I don't even know what that is. I think it says Vine. It is also part of who we are in existence today is our social media profiles. Of course, some things that we care about specifically at Pathfinder. What about your bank account's PayPal account? You transfer money, ever bought anything online using PayPal? What about your Bitcoin account? Don't raise your hand if you have a Bitcoin. Investment and brokerage accounts, utility bill, loan payments. We don't really care about who gets those after we're gone. Loan payments, and then IRS e-filing. You know, I've been e-filing for 10 years. Business accounts. There's a lot of retirees in here. Maybe some folks thinking about this as well. Customer information databases. Where's all your information stored that we use? If Rob and I were to kick the bucket tomorrow, where's that stuff go? Make you nervous? Actually, Commonwealth, because we don't store that information ourselves, because we don't want somebody breaking into our computer at 4018 Orlando Drive. Commonwealth stores that information with all the encryption technology that you use on your actual investment accounts as well. Client records, patient records, like your physicians and dentists, eBay accounts. So I know Rob's I would say a master user of eBay, and so I know those, they have access to different information. Yeah, I guess I cut that off, sorry about that. Domain names, for example, PathfinderWC.com, that's a domain name that we own as a corporation. So no one else can use that to put that on. So what happens if Pathfinder no longer exists? Where does that go? Blogs, for example, I was writing a blog last year and just quite honestly ran out of time for the business journal, the Wilmington Business Journal. So if you go on their website, I don't know if it's still up there because I'm not paying to play anymore, but I was able to write on there, and that was a blog, but it wasn't my blog, it was the business journal's blog. Just had my content in it. Other things, did you ever think about your frequent flyer points? How about credit card rewards? There's a ton of those things out there now. You can't shop anywhere that you don't have a loyalty card. And on a quick side note here, right? A loyalty card just might as well be called a lack of privacy marketing card. Because when you sign that up, they know exactly who's shopping, and they're watching all your behaviors, and they can either utilize it themselves or they can use it externally. And I think you probably heard me talk about this a few years ago. One of the things I read was Target at one point in time. This was not their breach of security, but this was when they were utilizing their loyalty cards, and they were watching people's patterns change in their store. And when women would start buying non-perfumed products, they would assume, based on ages, that they were pregnant. And then they would start sending them coupons in the mail for diapers and maternity clothes and all that type of stuff. It backfired, and they got in trouble for it because somebody figured it out. And that's the type of things that your loyalty cards do. But there's also a point system that you can, obviously you acquire points. My stepmother owns an advertising firm in Ohio. And she runs all of her business through her points card. I think she's got 2 million frequent flyer points on there. If she kicks a bucket, I hope that gets passed down to me. I'd like to have some free flights, right? Here's another strange one I didn't think about, but certainly more and more appropriate, is gaming money. So, is anybody in here a gamer? All right. So we got one thing that no one is. John, you a gamer? No. All right. So you actually go onto these games. Games have moved onto the cloud. So you may have children, grandchildren that are playing these games. World of Warcraft is actually a huge online game, and so you go in and act as a character, and you're doing kind of medieval type, conquer the castle or that type of stuff. Well, you actually pay real money to get extra features for your digital person. So if I want the big catapult or whatever, you pay this company money to get extra accessories for your virtual character. By the way, I own that company stock as a full disclosure. It's been a really good company stock to own. And that's sad. So, yeah, that's right. So, and that's actually, we'll get to a virtue, a breach there can be, how do these kids get online access to this when they are not even allowed to have a credit card yet, but somehow they're paying for all these features in games. So we'll talk about that. That'll actually come up. So why should we plan? So we talked about what the digital assets are. What should we plan for? Well, make things easier for you and your family and your executor or personal representative when you die or become disabled. So, as we know, it's 100% likely that we're all going to die. Disability is actually a pretty high statistic as well, too. And it can happen in varying forms, but essentially anything from getting in a car accident disabled when you're young to becoming mentally incompetent at a later stage in life. So those are reasons that you want to go ahead and do estate planning overall, right? But in particular, your estate planning. Identity theft. Preventing identity theft. Well, if you do your estate planning, it can help with identity theft after you become disabled or if you pass away. I have a client / family friend that passed away about a year ago. The husband called us yesterday, and I talked to him today. Someone opened it, so he got a phone call from Scottrade, and he said, you owe us $219. So he called me up and goes, what's a Scottrade? I'm like, I don't know. Well, I didn't know you had a Scottrade account. Well, I don't. And I said, well, I have no idea what you're talking about. So he called Scottrade. Someone opened an account in October. Within 60 days, they had moved money in and closed the account out. Basically, they had used his Social Security number, and they had used his date of birth. They opened an investment account online, closed it, and then he was hit with the fees. And so they're tracking him down, trying to get the fees. He didn't even know he had an account open. So that is, we're trained a lot on that behind the scenes. That's money laundering, is what they were doing. They were running money through a false account. Well, what happens if you are now disabled and someone's doing that, or you've passed away? Who's going to check on those types of things? A lot of that has to do with how you've done your proper estate planning and who you've named as authority to do things on your behalf. It prevents a loss to the estate. So, two ways to look at this. One is, we'll use those frequent flyer points are gone. So there was value to the heirs that could have had some free flights, and I can turn those into actual dollars and think about what that means. Or things like the gaming stuff, paying your bills online. So if you have automatic drafts and those types of things, the estate can lose money because things are automatically being pulled out, and this person is no longer around, so they're not utilizing the service, so the service should have stopped. So there's a couple different ways to look at that. One is that the asset has value to the heirs, and the other is that how the money was going out is still continuing after someone's disabled or has passed away. Another interesting perspective. My daughter just turned 2 on Tuesday, and I promise you, 90% of her life will be digital. I already have, I think I have 6,000 or 7,000 pictures of her. She's not bad to look at. So, of course, some of it's just because it's so easy to take pictures with my phone. That doesn't include the videos and all the pictures that everybody else has of her. So when I think about that, when she's, I don't know how technology is going to change, but I can certainly tell you that she's going to be able to have access to information that my pictures when I was a little kid, we took one, we went down to the film developing place, we went back a week later when it was ready, and we took it home. And those are sitting in a box in Mom's house. Now thankfully technology will allow us to take those in and make them digital, as long as Mom doesn't lose them or burn the house down before we do that. Well, what about Facebook? People, Instagram, and these types of things that are going to happen in the future, that's where a lot of people's story is. But also a lot of stories, I would argue, that are already on your computers. So you've already got your family photos on there. You probably have things that you have scanned in. There's also your email. I've been using email now for, I guess, almost 20 years. And so there are things that I have in that email account. I have a folder in my email that says family. I have one that says photos. And so if you get in there, you can see emails that went back and forth with family members that are very meaningful to tell our story. And so there's a lot of stuff when it comes to the digital world and how it does preserve a family story. And so just thinking about that, if you were to pass away today and no one was ever able to get to any of your digital assets, what part of the family story would be lost? And I can tell you that my mother had stored boxes for 18 years from when my stepfather's dad died. And she wanted to surprise my stepdad one day. And she wanted to put together this whole big collage of his father's pictures when they were kids and that type of stuff. And Mom sat on it for 18 years. So my sister went behind her back, got them, and went and put them all on digital format. So she got them all on digital, and Mom was furious. And I think it was the greatest thing ever. So I don't know what's going to happen with it. And Mom was like, well, that was a project I wanted to do. Well, you had 18 years to get it done. So if she was here, she'd probably still be furious. So don't tell her if you see her about that. Don't bring that story up. But my sister did something, and now we have all of that on digital format. So we still have the opportunity for Mom to put it into a format and give it to my stepfather. We haven't done that, but now we have it stored, what I would consider permanently, unless they pass away and we can't get access to it. Then the old photos are better. So it's just something to consider. And one of the other areas is protecting secrets from being revealed. Not that anybody in here has any secrets at all. So, being in our seat, I can tell you that every family has a different way of dealing with inter-family communications. One child knows everything, one child knows nothing. One child had an issue that was never talked about, those types of things. That's just some easy ones where secrets can come up. If it's an email address, it's important to understand where that is. Maybe there's an email that was stored that talked about something that you don't want coming back up in the estate fight. But obviously on the corporate level, there are things that we have to protect as well. So let's talk about a couple areas. So the deceased user policy in terms of service. So thinking about Facebook, and they've made some changes I'm going to mention in a little bit, but do you own your Facebook profile? Or does Facebook own that? When you put one of your pictures on your Instagram account or your Facebook account, do you own that photo? Or do they own that photo? On top of that, do you own Facebook? For example, QuickBooks is a service we use to manage business finances. It's basically the software that we use to manage that. It used to be you'd walk into the store and you'd buy the disk and you'd go home and you'd install it on your machine, and that was your copy of it. You owned it and you had a code number that said it was yours. Nowadays, we download it. Microsoft just recently went to Office. Now, everybody knows what Office is. That's Word, Excel, and all those documents. But what happens in that, now they have gone to a subscription-only basis. You can pay for it annually, or you can pay for it monthly. So I don't own my Office anymore, my Microsoft Office. I am signing a subscription agreement to utilize it. So when people think about that, well, do we have any rights to any of this stuff that isn't really ours anyway? And that's something to consider. Of course, did the decedent really know or agree to what would happen? Did we make assumptions? And that's an argument that the lawyers can take up in court because that's not settled yet. So thinking about this, Amazon Kindle, Nook, iTunes, Flickster, these are some things people will have this. Are you owning or are you licensing? So I've got something in here. If you've read your Kindle or iTunes, you know just how little control over your ebooks or music you have. Every time you hit buy at the Kindle store, you're not purchasing an ebook, you're licensing it for your personal use. And I love this line. Even if you reread your e-copy of The Hobbit twice a year for 10 years, you're no closer to owning it. And without Amazon's permission, no closer to being able to hand it down to your children. So, I have a lot of books. I have a lot of books that I started acquiring digitally now because I quit wanting to have books, material that are taking up space in the house. And plus my wife would throw everything out as soon as she could anyway. So I'm lucky I can keep half of my stuff in there. But anything digital is easy for me. And so for me, my books going online, they're not really mine. And I can tell you, I have done a lot of things to try to get things in PDF form, so it's actually mine if someone could get into it. But just think about that. You don't own your books that you think you own. Two laws that are on the federal level. The first is the Stored Communication Act. And what it talks about, I think this is important, is a law that addresses voluntary and compelled disclosure of stored wire and electronic communications and transactional records held by third-party internet service providers. So it was part of the Electronic Communications Privacy Act of 1986. So this was established a long time ago. And what it's doing is it's saying that it's protecting people's right to be secure in their persons, houses, papers, and effects against unreasonable searches and seizures. And you may have heard something about that in the Fourth Amendment. So when you think about that, the law was put in place to actually protect us from these companies to take our information. But now we go back and we utilize all these services, and we, maybe unbeknownst to us, have said, hey, great, we'll just sign up for a subscription. We don't even know this is our stuff anyway. And so it's kind of an interesting role, and where does this fall in the federal debate about the who gets to do what with the estate planning side. The other one is the Computer Fraud and Abuse Act. This was also 86, and it talked about where computers of the federal government or certain financial institutions are involved, or where the crime itself is interstate in nature. What it's doing is now some of those rules apply on a federal level. So they're taking it away from state estate planning and making it a federal issue, which hasn't been totally solved yet either. And so some of the dilemmas that we face in creating a state law around this is some of the acts that are already out there that were actually designed to prevent bad things from happening, but now are preventing an easy estate planning fix in many situations. And I shouldn't say easy, there's nothing easy about legislation in the law. So how does federal law interface with these user agreements? Well, agreements are often prohibit a user from granting others access to the account. By federal law, you cannot reveal your username or password. You're violating federal statutes. By the way, and I can't say that I've ever recommended this, but I certainly haven't discouraged it. Hey, make sure that in your inventory, in your estate planning, that you have your passwords and everything written down. Right? It's actually, technically, could be a violation of federal law. So it makes a lot of common sense, but right now it doesn't make legal sense yet. So when you consider this, well, honey, just go on to the Amazon account and buy it. Here's my username and password. Has my credit card stored, right? I trust my wife, maybe not with my credit card. I trust my wife. I have no problem giving her a password to do anything. And quite honestly, I could pull up my phone and she could pull up her phone and tell you where each other are all the time because we can see that. And that's very helpful when there's two people working and we don't want to interrupt anybody. So I know when she's at a daycare doing speech therapy or when she's sitting in her office, I can call her. But it's also helpful if I'm wondering where everybody is. I'm on the way home. Is she already home? Well, I know that I need to stop by the store and that kind of stuff. Silly stuff. So, but when you think about that, I'm giving her access to see where I am at all times. Why wouldn't I give her access to my email address and everything else? Well, you're not supposed to do that. You're not supposed to give someone access to your investment account. Or even in our business, you call up and say, yeah, I want to take the RMDs this year. Require minimum distributions out of the account. Go ahead and process mine and process his on the 15th. Well, we're not allowed to do that. We actually aren't allowed to take any instructions on someone else's account. Right? So with that said, same thing applies here. You are basically giving someone access to act on as you, and that is a violation because you're supposed to be acting as yourself. One enacted in some proposed statutes provide that they supersede any contrary provisions of user agreements. There's some legal stuff coming out. So what we mean here is there are contrary provisions in some user agreements, and so they're trying to put laws in there to say, well, this one and this one and this one are all very different, so we're trying to make it more uniform. Interference with contract rights are terms of service against public policy and thus unenforceable. Effect of the choice of the law, so that's a tough one, and constitutionality of such provisions. So these are some of the debates that are going on about how do we form the proper legislation in order to address these issues, because you or I think we own those pictures that are on Facebook that my spouse has posted for 15 years on there, and well, are we allowed to do that? So some of the planning suggestions. Actually, I guess this is as good as time in any. So Facebook has come up and addressed, well, there's another slide, we'll get to that. So specific disposition according to the provider's instructions. So this is what we're talking about here. So selecting data to be shared with the trusted contact. In other words, you go into your Facebook account and now they have the opportunity to choose who manages your account when you die. And this just came out last Thursday. It became public across the U.S. So now what happens on this is you can actually name someone, and I would read this. John found it first. Actually, Paul sent it to me as well too. He's like, I know you've got this coming up. Did you see this? It's pretty interesting. It talks about naming someone. Now, however, that person can't change any of the content that's on there. They can access the content, but they cannot change it. You are now self-selecting who has that option, right? So, and I don't know that all the legal parts are fixed in this. Is that person your power of attorney? Is Facebook giving you limited power of attorney? Are you signing an agreement with them to give limited power of attorney so that they allow this other person to access it? So there's some legal issues, and again, I'm no lawyer, I'm not going to get into that part of it, but they have now an option for you to select who you want. If you do nothing, Facebook finds out you've passed away. It will simply freeze your account and leave posts and pictures at the privacy settings that you had predetermined before you died, and they call it memorialization. So your Facebook page doesn't disappear just because you have passed away. This is a sad but true story that I found out a year and a half ago that one of my friends from high school passed away because of Facebook. I found out last week, a friend of mine from college, they weren't quite engaged, but they should have been engaged. They were together long enough that he passed away at 39 from a massive heart attack. And only because of Facebook. That's kind of a crazy concept there, but that is what they're doing. They're leaving it there. So I can go back and look at people a long time from now and see their Facebook profile that have passed away. And I'm stealing a joke from a comedian on this, but we had a comedian a few years back. You guys remember John Phelps from Clean Comedy? I don't know if you guys remember him. Anyway, he's a young kid here in Wilmington. He does clean comedy and Christian comedy. But one of the things he was joking about when he talked about Facebook, he said, you'll get an invitation to the service. Are you coming to Jason's funeral? Yes, no, maybe. That's how they send out these invitations. So it's kind of a weird dynamic. And I can tell you, it is quite honestly awkward when someone posts something nice about someone who passed away. Do you hit the like button? And it's real, but it's very strange. So we've got to look at this and see. Most folks don't have that access. I will say, Google also, since there's a lot of Gmail folks, Google's inactive account manager, for example, allows you to tell the service what you'd like to do with your data, delete it, or transfer your account to a family member or friend after a certain time of inactivity. This includes content from your Gmail account, Google+, Picasa, and YouTube, but it does not mention content purchased on Google Play, which is the one where you buy music and books and stuff. So, in fact, Google Play's terms stipulate that any rights you have to their products may not be transferred or assigned to any third party. So that follows back to the other side of it. So just some things there to consider. And of course, well, I'll get to this. Another way you could think about this is putting everything in a digital format that you have access to and giving it to somebody. You can put all of your digital photos on a DVD or a hard drive and give it to someone. Now, I'm going to take this a step further, and talk about this for a second. So this is a hard drive. This is a 3 terabyte hard drive. It's a lot of data. It has a USB cord that you can plug into your computer. It has a code system that you can put in. They also have these with fingerprint identification now. So you can store all your information here. This particular one also has the ability to give one other person their own unique code so that 2 people can access it, but the person who accesses it, the secondary person, all they can see is a file that has your access number on it. So that you, if you're alive, you can see that this person opened it and catch them for security purposes. Or if you've passed away, they get their code, then they get their other code to actually get to your data. So it's kind of a weird dynamic, but it is pretty unique to consider where we're going with this. And we'll talk about some of the trouble spots around it too. Comprehensive inventory, contents, detailed form in the appendix to the article. So basically what I will say is one of the planning suggestions is to put in your documents, whatever those are going to be. I don't know if you want to put them specifically in your will or you want to put them as appendix to your will. But essentially what you're doing here is you're listing what your digital assets are and whether or not they go to a specific person or whatever, but you're basically keeping them in your inventory. How do you store them? Well, trusted person. Of course, you're not supposed to give them your passwords, but they're trusted. Encrypted, which I mentioned, for example, those hard drives and stuff. Safe deposit box. Online password storage, so make sure you have this. And I have lots of passwords. I have one really, really, really awesome, tough password that changes, and that's the only one I really have to remember, because if you can get that one, you can get access to all my other passwords everywhere. So you really only have to break one to get into my digital life. But that one's going to be as tough as any password ever to get to a password. Warning, potential violation of federal law. So after all that, there is some issue that you could do all the things that we would consider common sense would tell us are the correct things to do, but it could be a violation. Planning suggestion, provide immediate access to portions of your digital estate. Most online spots now will let you give someone else permission. Pathfinder's Facebook page, and if you have a Facebook page, now you all raise your hand, you might as well like us on Facebook. John has access to it. I have access to it. I think Rob has access to it. Lauren has access to it. So all four of us can get on as Pathfinder, because it's a corporation. They allow you to put multiple people down there. You cannot go on and act as Jason. That one is not allowed to have multiple people acting like Jason. The corporate ones can. So when you think about this, other things will. For example, the Wheeler family album on Shutterfly. I can put family members and friends and people, I can give them access to part of it. I can give them access to all of it. So be mindful of some of the online portions that who you can give access to. Now when you pass away, depending on what's going on there, they may freeze the account. So you've got to be mindful of whether or not person gets those before they freeze it, or are they really going to freeze it because you started it, and that type of stuff. So you have to look at the agreements. Of course, same warning. A lot of services aren't designated for multiple users, so you don't want to be in violation of federal law. Authorized agent to access digital assets. I don't know that that's going to hold up in North Carolina yet. Maybe. The idea here with the power of attorney is you've given them access. They can call us up and say, hey, I need to get into the IRA account even though it's not mine because we got to pay a medical bill. Well, you've got a power of attorney. It's a valid power of attorney. We're going to be able to take that as authorization to allow you to act. Even if you sign this, is Facebook going to agree to let you do that? Or one of the other areas? So there's two levels of it. I'm hesitant to put this in here because I'm certainly in no way recommending this at this point in time. But there's also something called a digital asset trusts. And these are starting to be created. Client transfers all their digital assets to the trust. The digital asset must be transferable, practical for valuable assets. Your pictures, things like that. Trust buys the digital assets such as license-based assets that expire upon death. So now that the trust owns it, trusts don't die. Upon the client's death or disability, the trustee handles the asset according to the client's stated instructions within the trust. This is no different than any other trust. It's just that it's dealing with digital assets instead of your tangible assets. Will. Some other planning suggestions. You write your will. Here's my username and password. Becomes public record. I can go down to New Hanover Courthouse or the records and find all of your passwords to all your stuff. Don't put that in your will. Useful to transfer digital assets upon death. You could put it in your will. Keep it general. These transfer here. But asset may be governed by a user policy, which means it could be non-transferable, ends upon death, or it could be a non-probate asset. So there's some issues involved in that as well. But be considered that when it comes to the will. Online afterlife companies. Of course, where there is a need or perceived need, someone's going to try to be profitable on it. So they actually will store your usernames and passwords. They will send messages upon death and send messages thereafter. Now I can give you here's some real tangible things here for our team. So, Megan. So Megan Kopka's husband passed away, one of our staff members, of Lou Gehrig's disease almost a year ago. So they have 2 kids. She was trying to get this set up so that at their daughter's 16th birthday, she gets an email from Dad that he wrote. So some of that's very powerful. So there's a lot of neat things that could come out of this technology. But the access to usernames and passwords, well, how do we get to this online afterlife company? Is there a username and password to get into them? How much authority can we grant them to transfer things that the federal law says we can't transfer? So there's some issues still involved in this. Must use due diligence to investigate. These are also technology companies. Anybody know that technology companies change very fast and some of them are here and gone very quickly? So just be mindful of that as well too. So some of the obstacles, well, safety. My wife, because I forgot my laptop, was fortunate enough to be leaving the house afterwards, and Lauren comes up the stairs and says, "Hey, here's your laptop." I said, "Oh, that's great." So my wife dropped it off to Lauren in the parking lot because she didn't want to get out of the car and saw Lauren leaving, right? So technically, Lauren could have been out the door with the laptop and gone. I would have been very angry. Obviously, that's not the case, but computers can be stolen. If it was laying in the front seat of the car, or even in your trunk, or in your office, and somebody breaks in, they can take your computers in your house. Encryption can still be broken. As much as we try, every day in the news we hear about cybersecurity. There's always some type of breaches going on. We got another one, was it a week or 2 ago? What was the latest one? Anthem. Yep, so I don't know if you saw that. Target was infiltrated. There's all kinds of those. Internet storage can be hacked. The cloud is what we're talking about. So people can get into the cloud. They're encrypted, but people can still get into it. I have been in, which you're not really supposed to go too far in, but I have stepped in to the secret spot in Raleigh where there is basically a server room that is very well protected. Only certain people, you get access to certain cages, and that's where you keep your cloud server. Going in there, they're videotaping everybody in and out. There's only one entrance. There's guards. There's 3 doors to go through. You got to basically give a pint of blood to get in. Well, I don't need to walk in that building to get into those servers. And that's the point here, is that internet storage, you don't have to do it manually anymore. You can do it virtually. So part of that is still there, and the bad guys will keep getting better. Just like putting an alarm system at your house, and they figure out how to cut the alarm system, or now where everything's going to Wi-Fi and they can drive by. I don't know if you know this, cops have a technology now. They can drive by and they can actually see who's in the house if they're holding their cell phone. So they don't have to walk in your house to know who's in that house. Interesting, huh?
Is this just if you have video things all around your house?
No, the cop one is totally separate. That's just by your cell phone. The video one, you can also go by, and depending on what kind of video surveillance you have, criminals have figured out how to get into there. So they can look at your video cameras from their iPad or whatever they use. It's kind of creepy, right? So here we are, we're protecting ourselves, and it can be recording, but it's still connected to the internet. So I had a camera. We've got a security system, and we have a camera, and I could access it from my phone, and I could see into my house. And I loved it. I could see because we had a new person watching our daughter, and I want to make sure everything was on the up and up for a while. But now she's like family, so I don't care about that anymore. But I still want to know, is everybody at home? Is the baby still sleeping if I walk in the door? All that. So I was using it. Well, we switched internet providers. I can't get the thing hooked up. I'm not going to pay $50 for them to come hook up the stupid camera. So I don't have that anymore, but technically you could have been able to do that, and I have no way of protecting that because I don't know how they do it, which most of us don't. Obstacles to planning hassle. I think this is probably the biggest obstacle that's out there. You have to open accounts, close accounts, and I'm not talking about investment accounts here. I'm talking about your virtual accounts, your email accounts. You got to change passwords. You got to do all this stuff. Passwords change all the time. Equipment is bought and sold. Here you've got this nice estate plan for your digital assets, and then you get a new computer. It's just administratively a pain. And it doesn't take too long to think about changing anything is a pain, right? So I've got all of our bills coming to my email. So every bill that comes in gets emailed to me because I don't want paper. And by the way, people feel safer with paper. People can still walk by your mailbox just like they always have and pull your mail out and steal from that way too. And by the way, the latest breach of security, they sent out a notice for Anthem and said, we will not be contacting anyone by email, through the website, or by phone. We will only be doing it by direct mail. Wow. Thanks for making that announcement.
Yeah.
So now I get a letter in the mail and I'm supposed to trust that even more. Isn't that why we created all this stuff? Because we didn't trust those things? So anyway, so just be mindful of the hassle of it. So what you set up, for me, again, I go to that, I have one big master password. It allows someone to get access, me only, to get access to all of our bills and do all that type of stuff. And I do have most things set up electronically that will allow me. If a business will allow me to set up my bill, electronic draft, I'm going to do it. People say, well, when you get the bill, are you looking through it? Well, for me, I'm going to look through it, whether it's an email bill or a hard copy bill. I think people sometimes mistakenly think because it goes to email, they don't check it. You still check your bill, whether it's hard copy or email, but you're thinking about that. Uncertain reliability of afterlife companies and abilities to do what they promised. Potential federal law limitations. Can a fiduciary force a turnover? So we have to look into the legal part of it. We'll talk about that in a second. It's a case I'm not going to run out of time. So let's talk about who has given some access. Connecticut, Rhode Island, and California have given email coverage only. So they do have some laws in place for email. Records that are stored electronically, Indiana went and added that as well. Third generation, broader coverage to include social media and microblogging. Now we've got Nevada, Oklahoma, Louisiana, and Idaho. Specialized state legislation. This is Virginia only for deceased account holder is a minor. So there's some rules around that. Proposed state legislation, and of course when he designed this was proposed. And in North Carolina, too many papers. Last year, North Carolina was slated to amend the durable power of attorney and estate administration laws to include power to manage digital assets, but the provisions did not pass. So at this point, we do not have it. So the Uniform Law Commission has issued some model so that states can say, so here we have a federal one saying, here's what you need. And Delaware, so they have approved this, applies to agents, guardians, trustees, and personal representatives. Enacted by Delaware, they're the first state to do it. It became effective January 1st. So Delaware is the first state to have full comprehensive guidance on these types of issues. It was recommended by a federal board, so it may be adopted by the states. We'll see how that trickles out in legislation in the future. So that's to give you a heads up on where we are from a state level. And by the way, if you pass away in North Carolina, where you live, that's going to be the laws that govern, and right now there's still not one. Thoughts? Well, we've got to amend the federal statutes that block some of this from happening. We've got to enact comprehensive state legislation. So those are things that, and I'm not sure where they are on that battle right now, but they'll probably come back in. Providers gather users' actual preference. So like the Facebook example or the Google email example, people that use the online stuff will actually set forth your ability to do that in their licensing agreements. So, despite uncertainties, the prudent estate planner should plan for a client's digital assets. And I'll just say this right now, as most of your financial planning firm, if one of our clients passes away and we didn't talk about this or we didn't address this, we're not going to feel like we're doing our job as well as we should. It's, we'll talk about another example would be in 25 years from now, one of our clients' kid comes up and says, well, why didn't you ever talk about long-term care with mom? Now she's going to be in a facility for the rest of her life. I said, whoa. I did talk about it. So, that's the type of thing that we want to make sure we're at least crossing our T's and dotting our I's. Everybody is unique and different, and you're going to have your reasons why you do what you do, but at least we're going to be able to provide some information and get you some thought process around this so you can make good decisions. And with that, I know I'm right on time or maybe a little late. So, any questions that don't involve